Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Fiveable AP Euro review. Okay, well, I hope, Jason, that I'm able to keep you awake. Okay, and Santosh is back. Isabella's here. You're excited to learn about modernism. I'm excited to teach you about modernism. This is actually a very fun thing to talk about because things are changing after World War I. You know, the old, it makes people kind of question some of the old paradigms, especially some of the old assumptions of the Enlightenment, that technology was always going to be something that was going to be good and we can accept it uncritically. And then humanity uses the technologies of the Second Industrial Revolution to kill each other. All right. And so with that, now, ladies and gentlemen, remember to check out Fiveable Plus if you haven't already. Fiveable Plus is is an extension of what we're doing here. These sessions are free, but Fiveable Plus members can go back and look at the archive, if you miss a session, or if you want to go back and search, okay? There are searchable archives as well if you're looking for help with a particular topic. All right, good to see y'all, Rhea and Ashley. Okay, so let's get started with this, shall we? All right, so we've got 22 questions. All right, Tejas has got questions, and Emily might be taking the week off. Okay, so I think actually that Emily's class, maybe Emily's on spring break or something like that. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, all right. Tejas is asking, what is the age of anxiety? Now, the age of anxiety, this is a book chapter. I think that if I'm not mistaken, it may be the McKay book that uses this chapter. Let me see here if I'm not mistaken. But when it comes down to it, the age of anxiety is actually I believe it was a long poem, if I'm not mistaken. And so what we see here, yeah, the age of anxiety. Okay, so that is a book chapter in the McKay text. A history of Western society. And so a lot of people refer to this as the age of anxiety when it's like really it's not necessarily what it's called outside of that book. So when I hear this, I typically think, Tejas, are you using the McKay text? I'm presuming that's the case. Now if we were just to Google the age of anxiety, okay, so we see this poem that was written, okay, in 1947. So what's interesting about this is that, that's the name of the book chapter for 1900, 1940, and culture and all of that kind of stuff. But this is a 1947 poem, okay? And so long poem written in 6 parts with man's quest to find substance and identity in a shifting and increasingly industrialized world. Okay, so as far as that goes, how is it that we are to find meaning? And so strictly speaking, that it's just one very long poem that was published after World War II. And it's dealing with this whole idea that just this struggle to find meaning. And that really is what modernism is about, is this struggle to find meaning when meaning seems to be elusive. And so you see a lot of the art that's produced, a lot of the literature that's produced, a lot of the philosophy. When we get into existentialism, the very purpose of philosophy begins to change. Instead of philosophy, explaining life and giving us a framework for understanding life, philosophy becomes much more about the search for meaning. And so when you're thinking about that, that's really what all this stuff that we're going to be getting into this evening is about, okay? And so as far as that, Tejas, let's try to get a little bit more. There's no use having 23 questions if the questions are terribly vague. Okay, so that's some of these things. It sounds like you're kind of giving me an LEQ and that sort of thing. Maybe an LEQ prompt or something like that. But as far as that goes, modernization. Okay, now when you're saying modernization, that's modernization and modernism. Let me clarify on that, okay? Because when we think about modernization, we could be talking about technology and stuff like that. Modernism, when we start talking about modernism, we're talking about philosophical and and literary and artistic movements. Okay, so how did they revolutionize Western culture? Again, just remember that World War I is kind of a turning point. And afterwards, especially in Europe, you know, in the United States, we hear about the roaring 20s, okay? But in Europe, you know, where these people have just been through this massive war, you know, it's like, what just happened? And trying to figure out like the old order that seemed to have, you know, that seemed to materialize in the 19th century is gone. And what do we do about that? Okay. So again, ladies and gentlemen, like this is, yeah, the quality of the questions. Let's kind of think about some things here. Yeah, Emily is not here, and I mean, she asked really good questions. Okay, now as far as that goes, let me kind of give you an example. Like when you ask a question, like start thinking about like, is this a question that's designed to be answered? Okay, so as far as that goes, now Tejas, okay, so we've got a specific question about modernism and the Russian Revolution, okay? Now, one thing that totalitarian regimes tended to have in common was a disdain for modern art, okay? Hitler would have degenerate art exhibitions, okay? So it's like modern art was described as degenerate. Now, also, what you see in the Soviet Union, okay? I'm going to pull something up for you. Socialist realism, okay? So what happens here is that basically both the Nazis, now if we're looking at totalitarians, we want to think about both the Nazis and the Soviets. They were very much into like, let's forget about this modern art. Now also abstract art, here's the other thing about when we think as art is getting more abstract and less literal, that it's easier to give like, you know, cultural, you know, to make cultural commentary and to criticize the government in creative ways. Now, as far as that goes, that you know, that we see in the Soviet Union, the promotion of an art form. Let's see here. Okay, it's going to share. It's going to share. I promise. I promise. All right. So as far as what we've got here, okay, so looking at socialist realism, okay, so you see here, okay, the Museum of Socialist Art. So you see these socialist women who are, you know, they've got their pickaxes and they're going to work, okay? And then we see here all of these people, the working class here, that, you know, have got all of their, you know, just very propagandistic. There is a Lenin statue and that kind of, you know, realism sort of thing. And of course, you know, they call it realism, but there is a certain amount of like idealism here. But you see a man and a woman, you know, I believe, yeah, we've got a man and a woman with a hammer and a sickle. So this was something like, you know, we see a lot of like Soviet propaganda. And then here we see a Soviet military. And this, if you think about this, that this monument, it's not like in this like this really grand neoclassical style. It's in this sort of like, you know, here we see a couple of soldiers that are, you know, they're struggling here, right? And so, you know, this whole idea, this literal depiction, but also realistic. Now, this guy's got a big old sword here, but this is actually in Berlin. In Berlin, basically, the Soviets put up this, you know, in East Berlin, of course, not West Berlin. You can see that this man's holding a child, and he's got a sword, and he has cut up the swastika. Now, the thing is, I mean, this is communist propaganda. I don't get how Nazi statues get to, you know, they're taken down, but Soviet statues can be, you know, they're just, I think people may be afraid because it's, you know, I don't know what they're thinking, but I just don't see how these, you know, these statues get a place of prominence when Nazi statues don't. I mean, that personally, I don't find communism to be any less abhorrent than Nazism. And so there is Vladimir Lenin. And so what we see here, like when you look at this realism, this is one of those things that that the living up to the title of realism. So there's Vladimir Lenin, who is the leader of the, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Party. And this looks like, when you look at like furniture covers and stuff like that, this is very like working class looking and trying to, portray Vladimir Lenin as just one of the people. And so you see a mosaic here, but it looks literal. There's Stalin. So that's the whole thing about socialist realism. This is the type of art that we see in the Soviet Union. So as far as that goes, the Russian Revolution, now, even though, a lot of these modern, some of these modern art movements, actually started in Eastern Europe, Russia and Eastern Europe. Okay, so let me show you something as well. When we're looking at abstract or modern art, this is Suprematism. Now, remember when we're looking at these styles, I'm going to show you a few different styles here of different forms of abstract and modern art. You don't necessarily have to know all of these for the exam. You would use one of these as an illustrative example if you needed to talk about modern art. Okay, so as far as that goes, let me go ahead and show you an example here. This is an art form known as Suprematism. All right, so as far as that goes, Suprematism. Now, this is from 1915. This is right as World War I started, and this is Kazimir Malevich. Okay, so Malevich, Kazimir Malevich. And so Kazimir Malevich painted this black square. Now, the paint has kind of worn down, like these, this is cracked paint. This wasn't supposed to be part of what it looked like. This is just that it hasn't aged very well. And so what we see here is that Kazimir Malevich, he just decided that I'm going to paint a black square on a white canvas, and I'm going to call it Black Square. Now, when we talk about abstract art, what we're talking about is trying to separate art from literal reality. Okay, so that's why we would say, like, socialist realism, this is going in a different direction than some of these modernist art movements. Now, remember, I didn't say, as far as impressionism, when I was talking about that a couple weeks ago, that wasn't it's not an abstract art form. It's not a literal art form, but it's not abstract per se. Now, when we look at this, that is an abstract art form. So then we've got, hey, now that I've drawn a black square, how about a black circle? Now, what I noticed here is this says oil on linen. So he's painting on linen rather than on canvas. And so, okay, well, there we go. White on white. Let's try that. And so there we see here Suprematism, which is also the name of the art movement. And so this is, it's moving it. Okay, he's got a self-portrait there, but it's moving art away from literal reality. Okay, and then another form of art that surfaces around the time of World War I is Dada. Okay, or Dadaism. Okay, but Dada. Now the thing is, what does Dada sound like? Dada sounds like nonsense, and that's actually what it is. Okay, so what we see here happening in the 19-teens, about the time of World War I, and this was flourishing, it says, in Paris at that time. There are some Dada artists. Okay, now Dada artists, you can kind of see these are some pretty weird looking guys, like, just the looks on their faces, just kind of interesting. Now, what we see here is just, this is art that is specifically designed not to make sense. Okay, so I basically, looks like somebody cut and pasted a bunch of stuff. And there you go. So this is, it's not supposed to make sense. And then we see here, actually, Dada. All right, so Dada. And so we see that they're actually using this. Now, this is probably the most famous Dada work of art. Now, when I say a work of art, I'm using that term a little bit loosely, okay? Because what we see here is somebody took a urinal and turned it on its side and called it Fountain, and then signed and dated it. Get it? Fountain. Ha 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 ha. Sorry if you don't get it. I don't know if I get it either. But this is a great example of Dada. This is something that does not, it's something that does not make any sense at all, and it's not designed to make sense. Okay, so that's the whole thing about Dada, is a rejection of any kind of rationality. Okay, so it says this is a character from some series or something like that. So as far as that goes, when we're thinking about Dada, that's all that is just this is not making sense. And again, when we think about what's going on here, okay, that Dada is portraying nonsense, all right, and this is where we get into, if you think about like World War I poetry, you think about like Wilfred Owen, who did not live through the war, but you see that in an account like that, where somebody like Wilfred Owen stepped up and was like, I'm going to go fight for my country, and then by the end of it, it really has just sucked the life out of Owen and other and other people who were fighting in there. And a lot of people just it's like, look, that I thought that I had meaning, I was taught that this is important, and it seems like everything has failed me. Now, not like this is happening to everyone, okay? Mr. Donovan's fourth period Euro class, there you go, Ria. All right. And so when we think about this, now, of course, there's also what we don't hear about as much are things like there was a resurgence of religion as well. A lot of people, you think about going into a situation like that where life doesn't starts to not make so much sense, that religion certainly has a resurgence at that point. And so when we think about that, SKSK, what historical events influenced modernism? And I would say two things, okay? First of all, World War I, but modernism was around a little bit before that, okay? So World War I and mass industrialization, okay? And that's just people are starting to when it comes down to it, the world, industrialization has changed the way that people interact with each other, and things are becoming less personal and less certain. And people are trying to figure out, how do I live in this world that is not so constant? You think about the rate of change with technological development, and we're not living in a world anymore where you could be born and you could die in basically the same world. When you think about it now, I'm not even 40, and I think about the world as it was when I was even, when I was your age, kind of thing. It's like the world's changed quite a bit, and of course we're having to grapple with meaning in all of these new technologies. You think about the impact of social media and stuff, and how do we use these technologies that we're seeing here? And so, as far as that, I would say that World War I, and of course industrialization, and thinking about how do human beings go into this. All right, so what guidelines and characteristics? Okay, now one thing that we would note here is that with Dada, for example, the guideline is that there is no guideline. All right, so that is the whole thing there, that is about, like, this is not supposed to make sense. So if you were going into a Dada exhibition and you're like, hey, I've got something that's like rational and makes sense, they're going to be like, no, not so much of that, right? And so let me actually show you a few things here. I want to show you Expressionism. Okay, so here's another thing, that Expressionism is an art form that, and again, this is more focused on emotions, okay? More focused on emotions. So when we look at Expressionism, let me go ahead and share my screen with y'all again, that there is kind of a guideline for this school of art. It's about the inner experience, okay? The artist inner experience, instead of, let's see, it's about to share. Oh, thank God. Oh my Lord. Okay, yeah, all right. So Emily is Emily is here. Emily, we've been struggling over here. I've been basically dealing with a bunch of non-Emily questions, and I've been struggling. That's been a little struggle now. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a look at Expressionism now that I've got this up here. And come on, computer. Okay, so trying to get this a little bit bigger for y'all. but it's not wanting to do. All right, so we're just going to have to deal with what we've got here. Now, expressionism, kind of a proto-expressionist painting, is the scream. Okay, so when we look at this guy's scream, when we look at the scream, what we're seeing here is this guy who's, I mean, you can tell it's a person, but it's a really weird facial shape, and the point is to depict emotion. Okay, now impressionism, it's a little different than impressionism, because an impressionist artist, they're looking at what they see in front of them, and they're looking at the impression that it gives them. Okay, and so then an expressionist, an expressionist looks at something and they're thinking, what is it that in my mind, like what does this evoke in my mind emotionally? Now, another thing we want to remember with modern art is the influence of photography. So if I want to depict something literal, then I'm going to, I'm just going to take a picture of it. It'll last longer, right? And so as far as that goes, what a picture can't do is it can't show emotions. Okay, and so going from that, when you look at this versus the picture, you can see the stormtroopers advancing under gas. If it's going to, well, okay, stormtroopers advancing under gas. Okay, so what we see here is we see that in the art of Otto Dix. Okay, Otto Dix was a German war veteran, and we see like this looks, these guys are in gas masks, but they look human. These guys are in gas masks and they look inhuman. It brings out the inhumanity of the experience of war. So there is Otto Dix, and there he is before the war. And then we see him here as a soldier, his self-portrait as a soldier. A drawing here, a dead sentry in a trench. Now, he does some things too where he experiments with the triptych format. Okay, so when we think about the triptych, the war triptych. Now, this is a common form of religious art in the Christian tradition, especially in Byzantine art. And so when you look at this, there is a Western triptych. It looks like this is kind of what he's modeling after, because, you see where you see Christ in the grave, you see that there is, that there's this guy, that you see the guy in the grave, and then you see that, there are soldiers marching in. There is kind of a pietà, all right? So a pietà where you've got this guy with, that's holding the person who's fallen. And then we see here, instead of a crucifixion, there's a soldier hanging from a tree. Now, the other thing we want to note about modern art is that they are expressing like bitterness with the post-war settlement, and also a critique of capitalism. A lot of this wasn't like, conservative. This wasn't really a time where like conservative art flourished, okay? This is a time when you see what's going on, social commentary, and largely like a critique of capitalism, coming from a more left-wing perspective. Now, what you see here is in Germany in the 1920s. Now, there is a German soldier, a war veteran, who's having to beg, that he's having to beg because he's not getting any money from the government. There's no money to get, all right? And so we see this is a common sight, is this war cripple, is like this guy that can't work, and he's having to sit there on the street in his uniform and beg and rely on charity. Now, Otto Dix, then when you look at these war cripples, so you see here where he is showing just this like grotesque, like inhuman kind of looking thing here. So there is a painting of war cripples playing cards where you see the guy that's like lost an eye, and he's got, this guy's got an artificial jaw. And so he's bringing this out in a very like emotive sort of way here. And then you can see here where there's a veteran's view of Germany in the 1920s. And so we see the wealthy that are having their party, and then on the outskirts here, you see these war cripples that are watching this happen. Okay, so this is a way that he's dealing with the world that he's having to live in, the world that has a constant reminder of war. And then the critique of capitalism. So a lot of these like bourgeois types were paying Otto Dix and other expressionist artists to paint them. And you see Dr. Fritz Glasser. I mean, he looks like, of course, we see here that it looks like his nose is accentuated there, that he's being portrayed as inhuman. Same thing with Dr. Heinrich Stadelmann. All right. So as far as that goes, you know, he's painting doctors and lawyers, but he's making them look really weird, and they're paying him to do it. Like, you can really see his hatred of the bourgeois class here. But, you know, they're paying him at the same time because it's cool and trendy and all of that other stuff. And so, you know, with that, that's kind of an interesting sort of thing when you look at these different modernist art movements. And then there's surrealism. If you look at the work of Salvador Dali, surrealism is more about, that's going back to Freud, okay, and looking at the power of dreams. And so Salvador Dali is thinking more about, let's look at the world of dreams rather than the world of reality and try to depict that. All right, so going from there, who were some of the most influential modern artists? You know, which I think I've already been through some of those. The social impacts, not quite sure what we're going to do with that. Let's see, SKSK. When we talk about social impacts, let's try to ask a little bit more of a specific question that I can help you investigate. Okay, remember that what we're doing here is not answering an LEQ for you, but helping you to understand things so that when you get an LEQ on the exam, that you'll answer it. Okay, that's our goal, is not necessarily to do your immediate homework for you, but to show you how, you know, give you things that you can use to tackle things later. We certainly can, Emily, and welcome. Okay, yes. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming. And can we talk about Friedrich Nietzsche? All right, and this is where we get into, okay, that Nietzsche is looking at things, and this is where, you know, Nietzsche is an early, like, existentialist, or some people, you know, associate him with nihilism, like basically where we reject any kind of fixed truths. Now, Nietzsche was around in the late 19th century, before World War I. Now, his philosophy was around in the late 19th century, but it was really popularized after World War I. And Hitler was a big fan. Now, that doesn't mean that Nietzsche was a fascist or anything like that. But when you're reading Nietzsche, you can certainly see where some of Hitler's idea, you know, some of these ideas that the Nazis have. Okay, but I'm not calling Nietzsche a Nazi. But at the same time, you know, as far as that goes, Nietzsche is critiquing the world that he's seeing. Like, you know, his big, you know, when we think about values, okay, that there are fixed values, like traditional philosophy, that there is a such thing as objective truth. There are things that are true always, all right? There are things that are always true. And modern philosophy, you know, these modernist philosophies, especially existentialism, is about going away from this whole idea of objective reality and focusing on the subjective nature of the human experience. And so Nietzsche, there are a few things that have really got him riled up. Two of them are Christianity and socialism, okay? Because when Nietzsche's looking at these things, these are philosophies that Nietzsche says are like incompatible with humanity. That when you think about it, like, you know, what he says here, like Nietzsche, one of Nietzsche's books is called The Antichrist. And in The Antichrist, this is his critique of Christianity. And he talks about how essentially that people are like, you know, wild beasts, you know, and what Christianity has done is turn people into herd animals, all right? That Christianity has introduced this herd mentality, and it makes us something less than we are. Like, if you think about the Beatitudes, when Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the weak, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor, you know, blessed are, you know, those who mourn and stuff like that. Nietzsche's like, look, we need to glorify strength, okay? What he sees in Christianity is that Christianity is a religion that is, you know, is making the strong protect the weak rather than the strong being strong. Okay, Nietzsche believed that in order to drive progress, we need strong leaders. Okay, we need what he called the Ubermensch. Okay, the Ubermensch. I'll go ahead and type that in the chat. Ubermensch. Okay, so this Ubermensch is someone who is like an overman or a superman. So we need these people. Now, also, this is kind of flying in the face of some things people want to believe, right? Like all men are created equal and stuff like that. And when we start thinking about that, now in the United States, do we think that everybody should be equal under the law? Yes, but are there really a lot of people who truly believe that all people are equal, like in terms of talents and abilities and potential and all of that kind of stuff? We'd like to believe so, but can we empirically show that? If we look at any kind of empirical evidence, not so much. And so basically Nietzsche says that we need to glorify strength, okay? Because what we're doing when we say that strong people have to, they have to take a back seat because we need to protect the weak, then that's good. You're not having as much progress there. And so the other thing, when you think about socialism, that for Nietzsche, it's like, this is completely against human nature. And why is it that people are taking this kind of mentality seriously? And so as far as that, that's one of them. And then he also wrote Beyond Good and Evil. And I think that, now he's got a lot of great aphorisms, okay, that Nietzsche goes into these aphorisms, where he's just got like chapters that are just like sayings. And a few of the things there, like in Beyond Good and Evil, what he says here is, what is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil. And so when we consider this, okay, that Nietzsche's saying here that, you look at traditional philosophy and objective truth, and it's like, this is good, this is evil, this is good, this is evil. And Nietzsche's like, we need what he calls a transvaluation of values. And so, when people do things out of love, like, there are times when, of course, when we love someone, we hurt them, right? They hurt us. And we may do good or evil things. People do things that are sinful when they're in love. But as far as that, what is Ethan talking about here? I don't know what Ethan's talking about. All right. So as far as that goes, then we're looking at that. So as far as Nietzsche, we're thinking in terms of this subjective reality. What is good? What is evil? That's not to be determined outside of existence. So that's what's bringing in this idea of existentialism. And so that's really kind of Nietzsche, like in a quick nutshell. And I would remember like maybe the name of a book or two or something like that. Now, another thing, okay. Yeah, somebody help Ethan there. I'm not sure what he's talking about there. So as far as that goes, also Nietzsche said, when you stare into the abyss stares back at you. And if you think about that, that is really, really deep. It's like one of those things that whatever it is that you're encountering in life, it's just eventually whatever you're staring into is going to stare back. And that's something, if you think that I'm just going to dabble in this or something like that, it's just, some people say, if you think about it, like, I've heard that people say that you are going to be a combination of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. Anybody ever heard that? Like the 5 people that you spend the most time around, that's who you are. Because these people are impacting you. If you think about what Nietzsche's saying, that when we think about this, that, it's not so much the case of objective reality as just this subjective experience. These people that I'm around, they are going to impact me. When you stare into the abyss stares back at you. And that's that whole idea when we think about like individuality and stuff like that as well. Like, what is it that makes an individual? Is there anybody that's asking about Jean-Paul Sartre? Okay, because that's another one that I'd like to focus on as well. Okay, so let's see. So Freud on European thought and medicine. Okay, so the thing is, Emily, and thank you so much. So glad to have you over here. And if y'all will just look at some of these questions that Emily's asking, okay, I think this is important that you're asking questions about things that you want to understand, not like this is on my homework tonight, because what's on your homework tonight may not be on the exam, but we might use our knowledge of Freud in order to, in order to answer a question on the exam. So you want to learn some things, okay? But as far as that goes, yes, very important that Freud is coming around, and he's the father of like psychology, psychiatry, psychoanalysis, that sort of thing. We really, like you go back to the St. Paul's letters. Okay, there's something in St. Paul where he's writing about how I do what I don't want to do, and I want to do things and I do them, and there are times when I wanted to do this, but I did that, and he's going on and on. I mean, it's kind of thing that like he's just looking at this thing like, why am I not the person that I want to be? Like when you go back to the Reformation, like you think about like free will and stuff like that. Erasmus is saying you've got free will. The Catholics say that, hey, if you're a Christian, you're going to do good works because you have free will. And if you choose not to do that, then you must not be a Christian. And that's all assuming that the mind, that like the subconscious does not exist. So with Freud, it's like basically when we have these like mental quandaries, what is it about our subconscious? And a lot of this stuff comes from our childhood. Like when it comes down to it, a child that has, parents that love them, that consistently give them a play. Now, consistently give them an upbringing that's safe and loving, but also challenges them, but also makes them think they're special. Like when it comes down to it, when people have self-esteem issues, a lot of times that goes back to their parents. And so, but the thing is, we internalize these things, all right? And so Freud, looks at the family like, he's living in the Victorian era where the family's so peaceful and happy and all this kind of stuff. But Freud's dealing with people who aren't okay. And he's learning that a lot of these problems with his patients, it's like they have this, they all have these kind of messed up childhoods. And so Freud goes into some things like, first of all, there's the division of the mind, that we've got the id, the ego, and the superego, rather than just having one mind, that we've got stuff that's like kind of out there. So when we're born, we have the id, okay? So there's no I in team, there is an I in id. That the id is what the baby has, okay? Like when Caroline was a baby, she didn't care what I was doing when she needed to be held, or she needed to eat, or she needed her diaper changed, or she was just irritable, she would scream her lungs out, okay? And so the thing is, she didn't care about anybody else, she just cares about herself. A baby only wants self-preservation. And when young children don't get their way, they throw a tantrum, okay? Because they're having to deal with, like, this is what I want, this is the most important thing. Now, as we get a little older, of course, adults do this sometimes too, but as we get a little older, we realize like there's the superego. The superego is what comes outside of yourself, all right? So we learn that like what happens, like let's say you throw a tantrum and you get popped, or you get something, something happen, you get sent to your room, like those tantrums are not rewarded. And you find out that like if you show too much of your emotion, people don't like you. You have to learn how to kind of like, okay, I need to, Voltaire, for example, said the greatest love is self-love. Like we all love ourselves more than anything, but we have to conceal it. Like we can't make it look like we love ourselves too much, because then people get upset. And so we learn things, we learn what society expects of us, okay? So we've got what we want is the id. And then we've got society here is the superego, what society expects from us. And this is like the two angels on your shoulders. And then in the middle of this, you've got the ego. Okay, now the ego is the conscious part of the mind. And what the ego is doing is constantly mediating between the id and the superego. And so the angel and the devil on your shoulder, so to speak. And so the point of the ego's like, hey, I'll let you know if there's a Kahoot. I haven't been told. I mean, there's no Kahoot until otherwise noted. Okay, well, at some point there will be a Kahoot. I haven't been told about any tonight. So as far as that goes, the ego, it's like, let me see if I can get the id as much as it of what it wants as possible. And then the superego, is saying like, you don't need to get in trouble. Okay, so you think about like, if I do this, what are the potential consequences? What are the odds that I'm going to get caught and stuff like that? And so the ego is constantly mediating. Now, the other thing is that, things like the Oedipus complex that Freud said that, young men, when they're babies, they tend to have babies and toddlers, they have a conscious sexual attraction to their mother. Now, they find out that's the id. They want to be with their mother, okay, be with their mother, so to speak. And then the superego says, that's gross. And so the superego's like superego's like, man, mom's really hot. And then it's like, no, that's gross. And then, the ego's like, yeah, that's gross, buddy. And what happens there is the id then takes that, because knows that it can never happen, and it suppresses it. Okay, it brings it to the back of the head, and it represses this desire. So basically what Freud's looking at is like, people that have these repressed desires, and that's making people act the way that they do. And so as far as that goes, that's where Freud is bringing out this idea of the divided mind and the subconscious. And when you go into like psychotherapy, you go see a therapist or a counselor or somebody like that, then they're trying to help you to try to make sense and to try to figure out, why is it that you are doing these things that are making you unhappy? And what is the root cause, and how can it be addressed? So as far as that goes, we start to see the whole idea of like mental health and stuff like that, that before Freud, that wasn't really a thing. People didn't think about like the mind as something that needs to be taken care of, something that can be, that needs to be treated and cured and all of that kind of stuff. Freud was also a big cocaine advocate, like not recreational, but for medicinal purposes, just as an aside there. So thank you for that. Yeah, Freud, definitely important there. All right. So as far as that, now, Cindy, remember when we talk about a big topic on the AP exam, the AP exam as it's written now is not comprehensive. It's really just random, okay? It's not a comprehensive exam, which is why, like, every year, I get as far as I can the material. I'll tell my students, we're never going to finish the whole thing because I can't finish everything and, do this and this and this, show you how to write this and that, show you how to figure out these confusing multiple choice questions and all of that. And from year to year, like one year, it may not be on there at all. Another year, it may be an LEQ topic, okay? So this is one of those things that, it is in the course description. Modern philosophy and art are in the course description, so they could be on the exam. Now, we don't know what the LEQ topics are going to be or anything like that, or the SAQs or the multiple choice. So remember that this exam is not comprehensive. And so, like, there have been some times where people come out of the exam, there was nothing about the French Revolution on that entire exam. And then another year, it'll be one of the major essay topics. And so as far as that goes, we could say Shelley. Now, modernism, I would say that women's rights, we're going to look at World War I as more the causal factor for that. Now, of course, the thing is, it's not really until after World War II, okay? Now, if we're looking at after World War II, that's when we start to see, like, women's roles change, okay? So remember, as you're going into this, like, first wave feminism and second wave feminism, okay? So first wave feminism culminates with World War I and political rights for women, that women are able to vote. Then second wave feminism is more about the economic and social status of women, because once women were able to vote, they still weren't able to get like professional jobs and things like that, and they weren't getting respect. They were, they weren't, able to advance themselves. And so Simone de Beauvoir, Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex, published that in the late 1940s, shortly after World War II. Very good. She published The Second Sex, and she's starting to get into, like, today we have a lot of debates, not only about, about your sex, but also the idea of like gender. What is it that makes a woman, and what is a woman supposed to do, and all of that other kind of stuff. So that is, I think that when we talk about women's rights, that is really going into like second wave feminism post World War II. We start to see an impact because of the second sex. And of course, in the United States, Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which is, I think more accessible, unless, Simone de Beauvoir was a professor of philosophy, and it gets really dense sometimes, but it's a very interesting read. I've read like the first chapter of it. It was interesting. All right. And so as far as that goes, we would note here, modernism, remember that there is that idea of subjective experience. And so we see that both in philosophy and art. When we look at existentialist philosophy, we see this, this focus on subjective experience. And we see the same thing in art, that the art is not supposed to be a literal depiction of things. Okay, so we've got some things there. And let's see what else we've got got here? Let me, all right. Okay. Yeah, when I say Isabella, when I said earlier conservative art, okay, yes, certainly, like if you think about the Baroque would be a great example of like conservative art because it is allied with the Catholic Church. Now, I would say also, you know, a lot of art forms, like you think about neoclassicism and Renaissance art, that they're very much tied to conventional forms of art. They're looking backward rather than forward, okay? And so when I say conservative art, you know, I'm talking about art that seems to depict literal things, that has traditional themes and is rooted in objective reality rather than subjective experience. Okay, so as far as that goes, yes, Ethan, I'm just answering a question. Okay, remember that I can answer any questions that come in, whether they are on the focus topic or not. But I said earlier, as far as that goes, what we're looking at here is we're noting that modernism is not conservative. So when I talk about more conservative types of art, now, socialist realism, now we wouldn't call socialist conservative, but what's interesting is they do back a more like conservative and traditional art form. All right, so as far as that goes, you know, we would see that SKSK, if we think about the social impacts of modernism, well, if you think about like Nietzsche and stuff like that, that Nietzsche is, you know, is steering people away. You know, Europe traditionally was very Christian, okay? And so when you start to, you know, you see that Europe is secularized, but Christianity was still a big part of European culture, and you know, still affects it today, depending on which European country, especially. So one of the social impacts, I would say that you've got people who are, you know, less religious, but at the same time, there are also people who are becoming more religious. I would say that when we think about just the traditional, okay, the traditional like authority structures and stuff like that. I mean, it's starting to, you know, make a difference there. And also, if we think about Nietzsche, for example, now, again, I'm not calling Nietzsche a Nazi, but I am saying that, you know, you can read Nietzsche and you can see how Nazis were influenced by that. And so I think that there are several things there, but, you know, also, you know, as far as, you know, young people and the literary culture and that sort of thing, but this is really just a vague question, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Now, secularism, what we mean by secularism is not anti-religious or anything like that. Secularism just means that we are you know, that we're not being driven, like that society's not being driven by religion, okay? And humanism is, of course, when we talk about humanism for the AP Euro exam, we're typically talking about Renaissance humanism, which is, you know, humanism is about like human-centered thinking, but really what you mainly need to know for the exam is that Renaissance humanists were very much into the cultures of ancient Greece and Rome. Now, there will be some general reviews closer to the exam, so I'm going to try to get it a little closer to our topic here. All right, so as far as that goes, again, Sonia, I'm going to say that World War I is the biggest causal factor for women voting. Now, when we look at second wave feminism, we'll see that modernism is influencing that because it's going into a woman's place in society. So one of the things that we want to note is that the, you know, women's, you know, the enfranchisement of women after World War I, it didn't necessarily alter the place of women in society. Okay. And so now the causes and consequences of the Great Depression. Now, Tejas, I've never seen, now if this were a U.S. history course, the Great Depression figures in a lot more there. But what we're really looking at this point in European history is the rise of totalitarianism. So I wouldn't so much go into the causes of the Great Depression. I've never seen a situation where now that's just, I haven't seen it, okay? But I haven't ever seen a situation where you had to really delve into the causes of the Great Depression. Now, one of the consequences, though, what we would note here is that the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. that was right on the heels of the Great Depression. So the Nazis were around ever since the early 1920s, but they were always a fringe party. And so Germany, now we hear about all of their struggles with hyperinflation and war guilt and reparations and everything, but by the late, by the mid to late 1920s, Germany was kind of easing out of this and starting to find its way, like the Dawes Plan, halfway, around 1925, 1926, where the U.S. provided some relief for Germany. And so as far as that goes, so what's going on with the Depression is that after the Depression hits, German voters became much more willing to support both the Nazi Party and the Communist Party. And so what's happening is, the rise to power of the Nazi Party was not that Hitler got a majority of the electorate, but Hitler had the largest party in the Reichstag, and conservatives and nationalists and Catholics had to think about, do we want to back the Nazis, or do we want to back this coalition, or do we want to let this coalition of social democrats and communists take over? And that, they ended up going with the Nazis. Now, again, I can't necessarily judge them, because if you put together, if you stack up the pile of bodies that the Nazis killed and the pile of bodies that the Soviets killed, I mean, there's really no comparison there. And so that's one of those things. I can certainly understand why people were afraid of a communist takeover. So as far as that goes, I would say that the biggest consequence you need to know of the Great Depression is that, you see that the Nazi takeover of Germany, whereas if the Depression had never hit, then the Weimar Republic might have kind of hit its stride and found its feet and whatnot. All right, so was there a philosophy? All right, so Sabrina, I don't think, like, this is not, now it's good that you're asking these questions, because when we think about this, it's not a modern philosophy course, okay? So when it comes down to it, you don't need to know the distinction between modernism and postmodernism. Now, what you need to know is, like, for example, like existentialism, okay? This whole idea that existence precedes essence, okay? The whole idea of existentialism is that there are no fixed qualities to me, that, that I exist, and whatever else, that I'm basically getting to choose what I believe. And so, for example, like Jean-Paul Sartre, who wrote Existentialism as a Humanism. Emily, I would recommend, if you're still watching, reading that sometime. Love that book. And it's really short. And it was a talk that he gave, actually, I think, to a group of French communists. But Jean-Paul Sartre was trying to be accepted by the French left. And so he gives this lecture that I think turned into a wonderful little book explaining existentialism and this idea that existence precedes essence. So when I say that, gosh, I'm so dramatic, I'm so emotional, or I'm so stupid, or, why do I have such a quick temper? Whoa, Sartre says existence precedes essence. At the end of the day, you are whoever you want to be. And so you are, he says basically that a man is the sum of his acts, okay? And so when we think about that somebody's like, oh, I didn't want to do that. I don't know why I did that. It's like, no, that's who you are. What you do is who you are, because you have the power to make choices. You have complete freedom to make choices. And so he says here that basically that every man has basically a blank canvas, and on that canvas, let's see, that I'm going to say here, let's see, I want to get the actual quote. I don't want to butcher this, okay? But the idea that you make your own life and you make your own decisions. In life, a man commits himself and draws his own portrait, outside of which there is nothing. Now, here's the thing, like, this is where we get into one of the scenarios that he brings up here is a kind of like, right, when we think about right or wrong, okay? But here's the thing. There's not a fixed right or wrong. So he said that, somebody was struggling, during the war. Do I join the French resistance and leave my grandmother at the mercy of the Nazis, or do I collaborate with the Nazis and keep my grandmother safe? And Jean-Paul Sartre, his view on that is like, I can't answer that question for you. What you need to be thinking about here is, what you can reconcile. And so when it comes down to it, like he's got a play as well, No Exit, and that's another great one, Emily. No Exit, where basically a guy goes to hell, and he's sentenced to be, hell ends up being just this big house with a room, and then there are these two women that are brought in there with him, and they never sleep. They can never close their eyes. So imagine your eyes always being opened and never getting sleep, never being away from these two people, and the kind of anxiety you get just from being around people. And so basically this main character was a draft dodger, and he had avoided military service during the war, and he was having a really hard time, he said, I'm a pacifist, I'm a conscientious objector. And one of the women's like, you're a coward. And so he's having to justify it to her, like trying to defend his actions. And Sartre's like, look, you need to deal with your actions and their consequences. And you need to find a way to be okay with it. So if you decide that you're a pacifist and you're not going to war, then you need to just go ahead and reconcile yourself with that, is what he says here. And so, if you decide in that scenario I mentioned earlier, if you decide I'm going to collaborate with the Nazis and I'm going to save my grandmother, then you just need to be okay with that. Kind of like Harry Truman, when you think about it. Harry Truman had to drop the atomic bomb. I mean, that wasn't an easy decision to make, but Harry Truman lived with the consequences of that. He believed that he was doing the right thing. So that's very much in line with existentialist philosophy, that you decide who you are and you decide your own values. And the thing is, what he says is we're condemned to be free. That's the thing. Freedom scares a lot of people. We say we like it, but do we really want to be free? That is a difficult thing to take responsibility for, and to take responsibility for your own choices without blaming other people. And so, as far as that goes, let's see here, trying to see what we've got here. Let's see, find some more Emily questions. Jean-Paul Sartre. Okay, so Jean-Paul Sartre. Okay, and what we're looking at there is existentialism. Okay, so he's really like basically when we get into post-war existentialism. Nietzsche would be like an early existentialist. So as far as that goes, now Emily, I'm going to note, just like I told somebody else, I haven't seen a lot of U.S. history bleed over into this exam. Okay, so now sometimes you have to, there was actually a question as an LEQ last year about U.S. foreign involvement and stuff like that, but I don't really see, because the thing is, if we think about it, the United States, like between World War I and World War II, the main things that we're looking at in U.S. history are the Great Depression and American neutrality and foreign policy. Whereas when we look at European history, it's much more about, with the Roaring Twenties and such, but it's much more about a survey course of European history. We're more focused on the effects of the Depression, in terms of bringing about the rise of Nazi Germany. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily look into that. But Europe did experience the Great Depression. Okay, so that did happen, and that certainly made a difference. Hitler and the Nazis wouldn't have taken power without it. What you can do, there are 3 LEQs every year. You can actually type in AP 2018 AP Euro free response. So that's something that you might want to do there. All right. So as far as that goes. Let's note, Shelley, when we talk about anti-Semitism, okay, anti-Semitism is largely, it is a constant throughout European history. And of course, we've seen now, anti-Semitism certainly is not dead. I mean, we've got, a member of Congress that, they're having a hard time figuring out what to actually say to her. But it's like, he had a member of Congress that tweeted something that, it's just one of those things that's, by Benjamins, I meant money. And it's like, really now? So anti-Semitism is something that's really always been around to some extent or another in Western history and European history. Like you go back to the Black Death, that they blame the Jews. The Jews are poisoning the well. And so, and in the Middle Ages, Jews wore distinctive clothing and had, you could tell if somebody was a Jew just by looking at their clothing. And so then you've got the Dreyfus affair, okay, which, that had to do, so I wouldn't connect modernism to anti-Semitism, but what's happening in the 19th century is Jews are making an effort to assimilate into mainstream European society. And Alfred Dreyfus, he's somebody that, the Dreyfus affair is showing how anti-Semitism was still very much present in Europe at that time. So it's not so much, I wouldn't connect that to modernism really. All right, so going from that. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I have got, wow, this has been some interesting stuff there, and going into that now. Let me go ahead and note here though. Okay, Shelley, I want to note that social Darwinism is really, a lot of people misunderstand it. Social Darwinism is really more than anything else like an extension of 19th century classical liberalism. I mean, it focuses on competition, survival of the fittest, but it's not like modernism in the sense that it rejects like any kind of fixed truths. Like social Darwinism, so-called, okay, social Darwinism is actually something that says like this is the way the world is. So when we're looking at modernist philosophies, we're looking at philosophies that aren't giving answers. They're really giving more, like helping people search for meaning rather than providing meaning. Whereas social Darwinism is a framework for understanding the world in fixed terms. Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, and as far as describing totalitarianism, we are going to get into that. We'll get into totalitarianism next week. And actually, let me go in here and go ahead and let's see. I need to make sure here. Let's see. So Europeans, yeah, let's go ahead and let's see. I'm going to call this, instead of fascism, let's call this totalitarianism. Now, here's the thing. No. We're talking about social Darwinism. Actually, if you're talking about social Darwinism, see, that's where everybody misunderstands social Darwinism. That the idea is that if you let the strong do what they're going to do, so it's not like Nietzsche there. I mean, the idea is that if the fittest people are allowed free reign to do what they need to do, like in terms of business and politics and all that, everybody's better off, okay? So if we don't try to restrain like the people who are most capable with high taxes and stuff like that, then they're going to do things like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, when you think about U.S. history, that if they'd been restrained, would we see the same amount of progress? So the whole idea of social Darwinism, like I said, that it's one of the most misunderstood ideas, partly because, and I keep meaning to find this book, but Richard Hofstadter, who wrote like the first like book-length treatment on social Darwinism, was hostile to the idea, okay, that it was really like a justification of like the classical liberal world order, with a free market economy, low taxes, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what social Darwinism is, glorifying competition and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's one of those things a lot of people misunderstand, and unfortunately, the misunderstandings a lot of times go on to, even to the test creators sometimes. But yeah, people, and then also there is the confounding of social Darwinism with scientific racism, okay, which was also around at the time, but people confound social Darwinism with scientific racism. So as far as that goes, now Nietzsche would not necessarily be into social Darwinism because social Darwinism is a fixed framework. So Nietzsche, I think that he'd like that maybe more than conventional like Christian worldviews and stuff like that. But okay, so yes, oh gosh, the exams during Ramadan this year, that is going to be tough. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, that social Darwinism is a fixed way of looking at the world. Nietzsche does not offer any answers. Okay, so that's really what separates social Darwinism from modernism. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, next week we will get into totalitarianism. And I hope y'all have a wonderful night. And